Catherine is the slide master.
Oh,
if you can share your screen,
please.
Oh
yeah, we need to share the screen, don't we?
And
step 1.
Because you've been on holiday for a week.
I know, out of practice.
So forgotten. Yeah. Okay. So, right, thank you very much. So this is our session, HR and Employment Law in the COVID World. Many of you are known to us, but there's a few of you who we haven't met before, and so you may not know how busy we've been advising people about COVID and how it's affecting the workplace. We've been incredibly busy with this, and it's really good to be able to put on these workshops, which is a sort of Q&A. We've tried to keep it really light, rather than a formal sort of presentation. What we've done is every 2 weeks we've scheduled these in, and we're trying to pick out some of the questions that we're being asked on the ground, some of the questions that our clients are asking, and other people, intermediaries that we work with, are saying, these are the sorts of things that people are really concerned about. And so my colleague Catherine, who's our senior HR advisor at the firm, she's going to go through some question and answers, and you will have an opportunity to ask any specific questions that you've got. For those of you that don't know anything or much about our firm, just very quickly, we are a niche employment law and HR practice. We help lots of businesses and charities deal with their people management issues. We work with some of you who are attending today, and we are sort of one-stop shop for everything related to people management. Some of you are in our watertight package. Those that aren't, if you hear about that as we're going along, that's an outsourced HR and legal support package, and it's a really, really good way of sort of getting some expert help at a much smaller cost than you would otherwise. And if anybody's interested in talking to us about the package, then my colleague Jason's the one to speak to afterwards. But without further ado, let's move on to the session. I'll just say that for those of you that are not familiar with Zoom, there's a chat function at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to ask any questions or make any comments. And then at the end of the session, my colleague Phoebe, who's one of our HR advisors, she's going to collate the questions, and she'll do her best to answer all the questions that she can. If you don't get time to put something on the chat function and you want to do it the old-fashioned way, then please just raise your hand or signal us in some way, and you can just ask questions, because it's not a very big group this time. So we should be fine to take some questions from you, or if anything occurs to you as we're going along. So I'm going to leave you in Catherine's very capable hands to go through some of the common questions that we're being asked at the moment.
Thank you very much. So Jay, you muted me.
Sorry. I've been wanting to do that for a long time.
It's only taken you 4 years.
Sorry.
Okay, so before we move on to actual questions, I'm going to do some kind of updates of things. So the biggest update recently has been about the free lateral testing that are available to businesses now. So they're available for all your staff. Hang on, I'm just going to reduce that. Sorry. And you need to register by the 31st of March in order to be able to get them. Your business must be registered in England, and your employees must be doing work that they cannot do from home. So it's not as simple as every business can just phone up and get some lateral flow tests. There are a few boxes that you need to tick. And the tests are not for use on people with symptoms already. They're for general usage in order to try and identify people who maybe are COVID positive but are not showing any symptoms. So if you've got somebody who's showing symptoms, it's not that they then come into work and get a lateral test. They need to go and get one privately as per normal. So a Again, this was relatively recent. I presume you've probably all seen this, so it's just a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what's happening with the budget. So the Chancellor, old Rishi, announced it recently. He said that the overriding principle for this budget was a three-part plan to protect the jobs and livelihoods of the British people. So his plan is to continue doing whatever it takes to support the British people and businesses, begin fixing the public finances, and begin the work of building our future economy. And so there are a few announcements that he made, which from an employment point of view, we thought would be helpful to just sort of go through. So the first one, and the one that's going to have the biggest impact on most of you guys, is the furlough extension. So it's now being extended all the way up until the 30th of September, which we've all kind of got some mixed feelings about, if I'm being honest. I think our view is that really by then you should know whether or not the jobs are going to be viable. So probably people will have been made redundant by that point. But it is what it is. The scheme, it'll continue to be 80% of employees' pay with the cap on it, the £2,500 cap, but the level of government support is going to kind of taper down over time. So in July, the employers will have to contribute 10% towards the employees' furlough, with the government putting in 70%. In August and September, the employers will contribute 20% towards furlough, with the government putting in 60%. So, I mean, for some businesses, the ones who are still potentially going to have some elements of restrictions, like your hospitality, it's probably not viable to leave people on furlough because it's going to start costing you more money. So employers will continue to pay all of the employers' national insurance and pension contributions throughout the whole of that time. Okay. So then there's the apprenticeships programme. So this is pretty good. They're going to be investing £126 million in a traineeship scheme. The government is going to pay for young people to be given work placements. So if you take on an apprentice through part of this scheme, you'll get paid £3,000 for taking them on. It was previously £2,000. And it's a flexi training scheme to allow apprentices to work with a number of different employers within their specific sector. So they can kind of float around and do their apprenticeship. And then there's the Help to Grow. So the Help to Grow comes in two parts. One part of it is sort of training for your managers, and then another part of it is digital investment. So Help to Grow management is the training. So small businesses are going to be offered free MBA style management training to help them boost productivity. So it's aimed at your more kind of senior people within your businesses. And when it says MBA style, it's thinking about running a business. And so it's things like marketing, leadership, things like that. It's a 12-week program. It's a practical curriculum, so that they do it within the workplace, and they have one-to-one support from a business mentor, peer learning sessions, and an alumni network. Initially, there's going to be 30,000 places, which will be available over 3 years. And the programme is 90% subsidised by the government, and so participants will be charged £750. And I think it's worth. I think it's a great idea, and I think it's worth getting any of your senior managers on it or registering for your interest for that. Because why wouldn't you? For £750, you're potentially going to get some really valuable training. So I think it's a bit of a no-brainer, to be honest. And then the Help to Grow digital. So eligible businesses will be able to get a discount of up to 50% on the cost of approved software, worth up to £5,000. And the vouchers are initially expected to be available for software that helps businesses to build customer relationships and increase sales, make the most of selling online, and manage their accounts and finances digitally. What I would say about this, though, is you need to kind of think about how that digital investment might impact in other ways. So it might be that actually by digitalising your business more, it does make some jobs redundant. It might mean that you need to send people on training courses to upskill them. It might also mean that your existing equipment may not be able to sort of fulfill what you need in terms of the new digital things that you're bringing into your business. So it's worth thinking about this one, but you also need to consider the sort of flip side of it, the impact it might have. And then the Restart grants. So these will be starting in April. So non-essential retail businesses can claim grants of up to £6,000 per premises. Hospitality and leisure, because they've been more impacted during the pandemic, they can get grants of up to £18,000. Now, whereas with the non-essential £6,000, that does specify per premises. It doesn't actually specify that on this. However, I assume that it is also per premises, because it would seem strange if it weren't. And a total of £5 billion of new grants on top of the 20 billion already provided, which takes the cash support to businesses up to 25 billion, which is quite a tidy sum. And then very finally, you've got your recovery loan scheme, and there's not a great deal of information about this yet, but businesses of any size can apply for loans of up to £25,000, from £25,000, sorry, up to 10 million, and it's available through to the end of the year. So it's worth applying for if you think you're going to need it. But I'd try getting your grant first, because you won't have to pay your grant back. And I forgot to mention as well, with the help to grow things, the management package and the digital package, they're not actually available just yet. But what you can do is, if you go on gov.uk and type in help to grow, you can register your interest for it, and then I presume that somebody will be in touch with you when applications can be made. Okay. So, as Jay says, we have been having lots and lots of questions from clients, both employers and employees, and so we thought it would be quite helpful for you to sort of understand what our most frequently asked questions are, because it stands to reason that the ones that are most frequently asked are the ones that people are wanting to know the answer to the most. So, we can't afford to make the minimum furlough contribution required. What are our options? So the employer contributions are mandatory if the employees are receiving the grant. And what we mean by that is your national insurance and contributions. If you cannot make your contribution, then you'll need to remove the employees from the furlough scheme. And then you need to consider your other options, because unless they're on a 0-hour contract or a casual worker contract, you can't just take them off furlough and then do nothing with them. You need to do something with them. And you are contractually obliged to give them their hours and their pay. So if those hours and those pays, those hours and that pay is not there or is not available, you'll either need to consult with them to agree new terms. So it might be that there's a reduction in salary or a reduction in hours, and therefore the salary accordingly. Or it might be that you unfortunately need to make them redundant, but you can't just remove them from furlough and do nothing. You need to take some form of action. So we agreed to top up our salary, the salaries to 100% initially. Do we need to continue this arrangement? So obviously, right at the start of furlough, a lot of employers were topping up to 100%, maybe not anticipating it lasting as long as it has done. And now they may be in a position where they can't any longer. So no, you don't need to necessarily continue that arrangement, but you may need to give a new a new furlough agreement, or maybe just a variation to the furlough agreement if you want to reduce the pay. It does depend on how the terms of the existing agreement were framed. So it might be that your existing agreement might have said something, you know, at this time we will be topping up to 100%. However, we may look to change that. You know, something along those lines. So if there's something like that in there, it may be that you don't need to get a new furlough agreement. And if they refuse, then you may need to consider other options. And your other options are pretty much going to be the same as the ones that I just talked about before. If they're refusing to go on furlough, it might be that you need to make a redundancy. It might be that you need to negotiate terms. There are a few different options. And obviously, if you need any help with them, then you know where we are. Must we provide part-time work to all furloughed employees? So no, flexible furloughing is an option. And really, who you have back and for how long and when is around the needs of your business. So you need to look at how your business runs. You need to look at where the demand is. And if you've got different departments, if you've got one department that there's a high demand, then you're going to be bringing people back. And if you've got another department where there's no demand, then you know you're going to be leaving those people on furlough, because the point of it is that it is flexible to work around your business. And like I said, if you're not in a position you don't need to do so. Employees can stay fully furloughed. We would consider rotating employees or selecting some to come back full-time potentially. Just people can get burnt out. People on furlough might have sort of mental health issues where they're struggling with anxiety because of being at home. I know that I don't like it, so I think if I was furloughed and somebody else was back and I wasn't, then I'd be wanting to come back. So it might be worth considering rotating for that reason. And you need to also show a little bit of caution about discrimination. So if you're making it about the roles, like you would do in a redundancy, for instance, then you're less likely to come a cropper. But if you're bringing people back based on them as a person, then you just need to be a bit cautious about discrimination, because obviously if they hold a protected characteristic and they feel that they're being treated at a detriment compared to somebody else because of that protected characteristic, then that would be considered potentially to be discrimination. So I'm not saying that you can't leave them on furlough, but it's about having a conversation about that, and about making sensible decisions that are based around business rather than people as much as possible. What about TUPE transfers? We were just talking about that, weren't we, Jason? So yes, you can claim for employees of a previous business who transferred to you if either the TUPE or the PAYE business succession rules apply to the change in ownership. It only applies if there was a business transfer under TUPE and not where there was a service provision change. Eligible employees should have transferred from their old employer to you after the 31st of August last year and been employed by either their old employer or you before the 31st of October last year. And there also must have been a PAYE RTI submission, I can never say that, to HMRC by either employer, by yourselves or the previous one, after the 19th of March of last year and before the 31st of October, notifying of a payment of earnings for that particular employee. Can an employee be on maternity leave and furloughed? So yes, employers can claim for enhanced maternity pay through the furlough scheme. So when we're talking about enhanced maternity, that is for employers who pay more than the statutory minimum. However, you can't claim any statutory maternity pay through the furlough scheme. And what you also need to remember is maternity leave and pay are kind of two separate things. So sometimes you can have people who are entitled to the maternity leave, but they're not entitled to the maternity pay, for instance. And in those, so they are taken quite differently. So you can reclaim SMP in the usual way hang on, sorry, I lost my train of thought there completely. So if you put somebody on furlough, so if you take them off SMP and put them on furlough, essentially you are bringing their maternity leave to an end. So when we're thinking about pay, yes, you can't claim SMP through the furlough scheme. You can allow people to have time off, the equivalent of maternity, and claim furlough for that time. But essentially they're no longer on maternity leave, they are just on furlough. So when the furlough scheme comes to an end, you can't then put them back on maternity. Does that make sense? The other thing to consider as well, because what happened when furlough came out is a lot of ladies realised that if they came off maternity and went on to furlough, they would be getting more money, because they're at a point in their maternity leave where the pay would be a minimal amount. It's about £142, I think. So people were asking their employers to take them off maternity, put them on furlough so that they could get more money. The issue with that is that the government have stated that the woman needs to give 8 weeks notice if she wants to change the date that she returns from maternity, which is set out. It's a statutory provision that in any event. So a lady technically has to give you 8 weeks notice, but you as an employer generally can, if you choose to, you can ignore that 8 weeks. You can accept it. You can accept a change generally with less of a time period if that's what you want to do. But with this, if you accept a shorter time period of that notice, then technically you would probably be committing furlough fraud, because the government have said that if somebody wants to come off maternity at a different date than they had originally proposed, and you are going to be immediately placing them on furlough, they need to give 8 weeks notice on that date change. So if you take them off maternity and put them on furlough during that 8 weeks, then potentially you could get yourself in hot water. So something we're thinking about. Holidays. Now, I know that I keep banging on about this. Our regular clients will probably agree that I have been banging on about it. I know that I've talked to Heather. I know you're on here, and Holly quite a few times, haven't we, had this conversation? So holidays, while people are on furlough, we are strongly recommending that you enforce holiday if you haven't already. We're having a lot of our clients who are in a position where their employees are either on furlough, or even employees who aren't on furlough who just don't want to take holiday on the assumption you'll allow them to carry it over because they can't go to, they can't go to Corfu and have some calamari. And so they're not wanting to take the holiday, they're wanting to save it up. And you're going to get yourself in a position where towards the end of your holiday year, you're either going to have too many holidays to go round, and so you're not going to be able to fit them in, or you're going to have people really wanting to carry them over, which is going to make next year difficult. So you'll either potentially have to give loads of holiday next year, or you're going to have uncomfortable conversations with people about the fact that you're not going to allow them to carry it over and have some disgruntled employees. So I would really, really start thinking about it, and start either dictating to them periods of time in which they need to take their annual leave, or enforcing annual leave and telling them you are taking it. The only watch out with that is that you do need to give twice as much notice as the amount of holiday you require them to take. So if you want them to take a week, you need to give them a minimum of 2 weeks notice on that. But if you don't do it, then you're potentially going to have a bit of a sticky situation at the back end of your holiday year. So Hannah's going to kick me for this, I'm sure, but Hannah and her vaccine diaries. So we've been having lots of questions about vaccines. Obviously, as they're getting rattled through, it's becoming more and more prevalent that people are wanting to enforce them, things like that. Or you're getting employees who are being mistreated due to vaccine issues. Hannah, the lovely Hannah, has been taking the majority of the calls about vaccines. So these are some of the ones that she's had and her advice. Don't worry though, Hannah, I'm not going to throw it to you to give your advice live. So scenario number one, and interestingly, the vast majority of the calls that we've been getting regarding vaccines are actually from employees rather than the employers. The employee had 3 tests in a week. We've been trying to logic out why on earth he did this. We can't really. He did. He had 3 tests on consecutive days. The first one came back positive, the second one was negative, and the third one was inconclusive. What he did is he did self-isolate for a few days and then went into work, but within 10 days of having that positive test, and his employer found out about it and they disciplined him for it. Again, we're not really sure why he did that, and I think it's quite clear that he was sort of in the wrong a little bit there. So Hannah's advice that he should have spoken to the employer when he had the negative after the positive. So when he took his second test, he should have called them up and said, look, this has happened, and taken their guidance on it. And government guidance is to self-isolate for 10 days. So they probably would be justified in disciplining him in this situation because he potentially put his colleagues at risk. Scenario number 2, the employee works in a care home and is currently 16 weeks pregnant. The employer are trying to force her to get the COVID vaccine. She's saying no, because obviously the government guidance is that pregnant ladies shouldn't, and also her GP and her midwife have explicitly told her this. And so they're going to discipline her for refusing to have the vaccine whilst pregnant. So Hannah's advice on this one was that she should probably provide medical evidence in form of a letter from her GP or from her midwife. And if she's disciplined, then there's a chance that it could be considered to be pregnancy discrimination, unless the employer can prove that there was a legitimate aim about it. Now, it may be that there's a legitimate aim to have the vaccine in the first instance because it's a care home, but I think the thing about this is that she's pregnant as well, and obviously the government guidance is very clear. So they're basically disciplining her for following the medical advice. So I think what we would recommend is that rather than disciplining, if this was one of our clients, the business, we would say probably not to discipline, but what we would probably say is if you consider her to be at risk because it's a care home and because she won't have the vaccine, then probably a medical suspension would be much more appropriate. So scenario number 3. So this employee was tested positive on the 18th of January and isolated for 10 days, but was still ill. Then got a fit note for COVID-19 fatigue for 4 weeks, but still didn't feel fit to return to work. And the fit note's up to 24th of February. He'd also been to A&E for tests on the 9th of February, and they said his lungs were inflamed. His employer's putting a pressure on him to return to work. He's been with the company for 26 years as an LGV driver. The employer said they want him back in work on Monday, but he didn't feel fit enough. And he started to feel frightened that they will sack him and start to feel scared to answer the phone when they call. So very sad. So Hannah's advice on this, he's got 26 years employment. So he's very, very protected due to his length of service. Potentially, he has got long COVID. Now, the thing with long COVID is not a lot is known about it yet. So at this point, it's difficult for us to advise as to whether or not it would be considered to be a disability or not. So in the Equality Act, the definition of a disability is something that's long-standing or going to be long-standing, and it's something that has a substantial detrimental impact upon your day-to-day life. And for it to for anything to be considered a disability, it needs to sort of fit into those two definitions. So because COVID is so new, there's nothing that's come out of the court system yet that we can sort of review and look at to take as a guide as to whether or not long COVID would be considered to be a disability. If it is, and he gets fired for it, then that could very well be considered to be discrimination, depending on how they handled it. We would suggest that they need to follow a capability procedure due to sickness, and if they tick all of those boxes and did dismiss him and they've followed a full process, then it could be that it is a fair dismissal. But I think if they just went straight ahead and dismissed him, it would probably be seen to be unfair. But our advice to him was that he kind of needs to work with them. He needs to answer the phone. They might be putting pressure on him, but he just needs to carry on getting his fit notes and follow the process through. And we can't actually stop them dismissing him, but if they do, then we probably would be able to help him make a claim if necessary. So scenario number 4, 23 years service this chap had, and he felt dizzy one morning, so he ordered a test, even though that's not one of the symptoms. His daughter has access to lateral flow tests due to a profession and has to test weekly, and his daughter was negative when she had her test, so he assumed that living in the same house, he would be too. His test then came back positive, but he had already gone into work, excuse me, in between taking the tests and getting the result, which is obviously not the right thing to do. And he was invited to a disciplinary for gross misconduct, for putting the factory at risk, and ultimately he was actually dismissed. So Hannah's advice was that he's got 23 years service, so that gives him the right to claim unfair dismissal if he so desired. However, she did say that if they can show that he was aware of the rules and regulations and aware that he was breaching those rules and regulations and that he was meant to abide by them, it may be that it would be found to be a fair dismissal. And she also felt that it probably would be considered to be gross misconduct as well because of the environment in which he worked. He described he works in quite close quarters with his fellow colleagues and it's difficult to socially distance. So if he's had a test, then arguably he has a suspicion he has COVID, and so he shouldn't have gone into work. And so we kind of had to tell him that there was a chance that it would be fair. So that's all of the vaccine ones. And then this is the final little bit for you. So we geeked out a little bit in the office when this happened, because the first case on mask wearing dismissals has come out of the tribunal. However, it was quite well publicised, but it's not all it appears to be. So it's Cubilius, I think I've said that right, versus Kent Foods Limited. The tribunal ruled that an employee sacked for refusing to wear a face mask was not unfairly dismissed. So it was a fair dismissal. The employer had a genuine belief that the employee had been guilty of misconduct, having carried out a reasonable investigation into facts that were not in significant dispute. And it had acted reasonably in treating the alleged misconduct as a sufficient reason for dismissal. So that's great news, isn't it? It means that if someone refuses to wear a mask when it's in your policy that you need to, you can fire them and it's going to be safe. Or is it? So when you look at the nuts and bolts of this case and you get into the nitty-gritty, what you find is actually this chap was not dismissed for refusing to wear a mask. He was dismissed because of third-party pressure. So I'll explain to you what that means. He was a driver of lorries of some description, and the Kent Foods where he worked had got their major client, which was Tate and Lyle, the sugar people. Tate and Lyle themselves had got the policy around mask wearing, and the policy there is that unless you're medically exempt, then at all times when on their premises you have to wear a mask. So that includes being in the cab of the lorry. He took umbrance to this. I have no idea why. And he said he was happy to wear a mask everywhere else, but he didn't feel that he needed to wear a mask in the cab of his own lorry, even though it's their policy to do so at Tate and Lyle. He was spoken to a number of times, carried on refusing to do it with no justifiable reason. And so Tate and Lyle then said to Kent Foods, well, we don't want him working on our premises anymore. And so they basically said he's not coming back. And Kent Foods didn't have any alternative work for him. And so he was then dismissed on that basis. So that's where the third party pressure came from. It was Tate and Lyle. So whilst technically, yes, he was dismissed for not wearing a mask or refusing to wear a mask, it was more about the third party pressure and also probably a failure to follow a reasonable management instruction, because he wasn't saying I'm not wearing it because I'm either I have a belief that I don't need to, or, you know, I'm a COVID non-believer, or I'm medically exempt. He just didn't want to wear it in his own cab. So I've already gone over all of that. And like I said, he accepted he was happy to wear a mask everywhere other than the cab of his lorry on the premises of the client. So it's not as simple as it first seems. And sort of on the back of that, your takeaway as an employer is it goes to show that disciplinary procedures are not always black and white. Anybody that deals with me, who I help, will know that I always say that the investigation is the most important bit. And just because something on face value seems to be one thing, you can't always assume that it is. That full investigation needs to be done in every different circumstance, because every different circumstance needs to be taken on its own merits. Had he said, I'm not wearing a mask because I've got COPD, for instance, which is potentially a disability and therefore a protected characteristic, and he got dismissed on that basis, there's a good chance it would have been found to have been discrimination. So not everything is black and white. You always need to get into the nuts and bolts. And all decisions on individual cases should be made on their own merit. Just because somebody else might have been fired for not wearing a mask, it doesn't follow that everybody can. And it highlights, like I said, the importance of the thorough investigation. The thorough investigation works in the employer's favour massively in this case, as the rationale for all the decisions could be objectively evidenced, and the judge made a point of that. And when it comes to third-party pressure, you need to be able to evidence you've done all you can. One of the things, again, that worked in their favour is the fact that Tate and Lyle said we don't want him back. They then got in touch with Tate and Lyle and almost pleaded with them to allow him back, so that he could, and so that they could carry on employing him. And Tate and Lyle stood firm. Had Kent Foods not gone back a couple of times and said, are you sure you won't change your mind, then they wouldn't have been able to show that they did all that was reasonable to change the mind of the client. Okay. And obviously, if you need any help with anything to do with having to discipline somebody for failure to wear a mask, it's really important that you get advice. Obviously, our watertight clients, you can give your nominated advisor a tinkle, and anybody else, give us a call. The details will be at the end that you can contact us on, and we can help you, absolutely. So I'm now going to hand over to Phoebe, who is hopefully going to answer all of your questions.
Hi everyone. Well, there haven't actually been any questions, so you've obviously done a great job. But I just thought I'd mention something which Jay put in the chat, for anybody who hasn't seen that, which is that yes, furlough has been extended until September, but that doesn't mean that you should necessarily choose to delay any redundancies that are impending, because during that time, people are still going to accrue holidays, gain continuous service and more employment rights in some cases, and there could even end up being more redundancy to pay if you leave it longer.
Yeah, because it could take them over into another year, couldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I've had a lot of questions about this as well, as to whether or not the fact that furlough is being extended will undermine any redundancy rationale. And I've been saying that it absolutely won't. because it's not a long-term solution.
No, it isn't at all. And I guess another thing to think about is your vaccine policy, isn't it? Any of our watertight clients, get in touch with your advisor, because we have just done a vaccine policy. It's a voluntary vaccine policy. And anybody else, if you do need one, obviously you can get in touch. And the other thing that we are also advising, which again, our watertight clients, if you get in touch, we can send you a copy of, is doing a return to work after furlough interview. So in the same way that you would do a return to work if somebody's been off sick, we think, especially for the ones who've been on furlough for a lengthy period of time, just do a return to work when they come back. Give them any updates, anything that might have changed in the business, make sure they're okay, make sure there's nothing that's changed with them, and just have a bit of a coffee and a chat, but document it so that you've got that for if you need to. And from a vaccine point of view, lateral flow test point of view, Jason, can I just ask, is there anything from a health and safety point of view that people need to consider if they're going to be doing the lateral flow tests, or just anything in general COVID related to do with health and safety?
Well, from a lateral flow point of view, I think you covered it. But what I would say in terms of health and safety, and this came to light over the weekend, where my daughter works, she's in an office of a construction-related business. They had an outbreak of COVID a few months back, and unfortunately, one of the employees passed away from it. They had middle of last week, they had a spot check by HSE, and one of the things that they've fallen down on was they hadn't recorded names of staff that had COVID on their files, and also they'd not recorded down staff that had been already vaccinated. So that's something from a HSE point of view, that if you do get inspected by health and safety executive, that's one thing that they will be looking out for, and that's one thing that I wasn't aware of that they were looking out for. So it's worth just mentioning and pointing out that that any staff or any of your employees that have had COVID or unfortunately get it, over the next sort of coming months, just document it down as to when they've had it and put it on their file. But also, it's probably good practice as well to document as and when your staff are vaccinated from the first vaccine and the second one as well.
Thank
Can
you.
I
And I
ask
guess
a
as
quick
well.
question? Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, Catherine.
No. I was just going to say, because that's quite personal data.
Yeah.
Given that it's health related, you'd need to be careful about how you store it and how long you keep it and things like that. So.
And also, would you need to get express permission from people to share with other people in the business that they had COVID?
You would, because technically if it should be confidential like any illness is. What you should do at the moment is you can say that somebody has got it, but you can't say who it is. Obviously, if they're happy for you to tell people, then that's absolutely fine. And I think a lot of people are assuming, oh, well, if somebody's got it, I've then got to self-isolate. In actual fact, what will happen is track and trace will contact any employee who needs to self-isolate, because they will speak to the person who has COVID, who will then say, well, I've worked, this is where I work, this is who I work with, this is what I do, this is who I've been in contact with. Because it's not just a case of, oh, well, I've been in contact with them, so now I need to isolate. It's about, you need to have been closer than a metre for more than 15 minutes and things like that for it. So unless an employee gets contacted by track and trace, they don't need to isolate.
Can I ask a quick question about vaccine policies? Just so for anybody who doesn't know, I work for the BII, so we're hospitality support for pubs in the main. Obviously, from a kind of general view of the employees of hospitality businesses, a lot of them will be very young people, so are not likely to get a vaccine anytime soon, and certainly not probably before reopening, I wouldn't think, although some may have it. Is there any, therefore I would think there would be a lot less companies within the hospitality industry that would want to have a vaccine policy, because their staff in the main won't have access to it. So is there any is there any kind of allowance for that, or are you recommending people to have vaccine policies, or are you saying you've got to take it on each individual basis?
Yeah, we are recommending that you have a vaccine policy. And well, at the minute, we don't think that you can make vaccines mandatory. And Jay, I think you'd probably agree with me that we can't see that they ever will be mandatory.
Yeah, we've had some discussion just this morning about that, because we're getting ready to send out a vaccine policy to all our watertight clients, and we were just talking about, you know, what will happen if clients want to enforce them. And in fact, I think one of the questions Mark's asked is, can we enforce a policy to ensure staff returning to the office are vaccinated? We actually had a bit of divided opinion.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, in short, if an employer wants to put in place a mandatory policy, they can put in place a mandatory policy and we'll help you write one. But lots of other things flow from that. So discrimination issues, constructive dismissal, all sorts of things that you know, that could be problematic. And one of the other little things to think about is, you know, at the moment, some people don't want to have the vaccine because they feel it's not been properly tested, and there's already reports about clots. I don't know how real they are. None of us really know, do we? And so if I were an employer, I wouldn't want to mandate a vaccine. I'd want to use everything I could to encourage, is what our policy is going to guide, you know, our clients to do. Because I suppose there's a tiny risk that if you forced employees to have a vaccine and it turns out that that vaccine causes some ill effect, you know, in the future, can you be sued then for not protecting their health, or in fact damaging? I wouldn't want to be in that position.
yeah. I think the policy that we're drafting is more about how, as an employer, you're going to facilitate it, how you're going to allow it, how you're potentially going to incentivize it, and it's more about giving them more information about what the vaccine is and why it's important that you know, people get it, and why you're therefore encouraging it rather than being forced to take it.
And I suppose from a hospitality perspective, if we did end up being in a situation where people were only allowed to freely visit hospitality venues and theatres and all of that, if they had a COVID passport, as it has been sort of, you know, muted, then that would need to apply to staff as well, if that was the case, because you can't ask people to have a vaccine before they come into your venue if you've got people working in there who haven't been vaccinated. So yeah, for that reason, I think they probably won't go down that road, because I don't think it's possible. I can't see it happening.
Well, the government have been very clear all along that they're not going to make it mandatory, and so unless the government makes it mandatory in one way, shape or form, I think it'll be difficult for employers to do so as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are lots of problems that, you know, we can't even foresee at the moment, and it's such a changing picture. But one of the things, I don't know, Kat, if you talked much about flexible working, and I don't know if Phoebe's answered this question from Sue about we insist a member of staff now works in the office full time if they aren't working effectively at home. What good evidence have you done that?
I think you can. No, I haven't replied to that one yet. I was just about to. I think that you absolutely can, as long as it's proportionate. And what I would say is just be careful that it's not a wider performance issue. I think if there's a direct correlation between kind of poor output and their working environment at home, then absolutely, obviously subject to any restrictions in the workplace and risk management. But I think if it's a wider performance issue, then I wouldn't necessarily bring them back to the office in order to manage that.
Thanks,
I think Phoebe. I would try to manage it.
I think just to say on home working and flexible working, there's going to be a real push towards that going forward. There's already consultation going on whether employees have the right to request home working. So it's really important to make sure you've got a home working policy. Those of you that are watertight clients, if you haven't already had the home working policy, I think the team sent out the policies not long, a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago. Make sure that you've got that, because that will enable you to monitor performance and everything else that you need to do, you know, protect data, talk about breaks, and, you know, shape the home working arrangement in the way that you want, which I think is a really good idea to do, rather than, you know, most of us have been thrown into a home working situation without really giving it much thought. and then that's become the status quo. So I think now it's time to sort of, you know, create the arrangement that you want for your business going forward.
Thank you for that. Phoebe, can I just clarify then? So if this team member's chargeability is down and cases aren't being closed correctly, then we're well within our rights to ask them to come back in full time?
I think so. However, I think I'd probably consider maybe 1 or 2 days a week before you go straight to full time, and see how that goes for a few weeks. But I just make sure that the issues are clearly communicated to the person before you then ask them to come in, to give them an opportunity to look it out before they have to come in again.
Okay. Thank you, Phoebe.
So has anybody else got any further questions? Speak now or forever hold your...
I've got another one, sorry for
okay.
jumping in. It's just on the digital help that you mentioned. And again, there's not an awful lot of information out there at the moment, no. But do you know if it's going to be something that can be applied for as a grant only for packages that you take on board going forwards, or do you think it would be retrospectively applied if you have had to spend money on digital solutions for your business throughout the pandemic?
As you said, there's not a lot of information on it, but certainly some of the information that is out there already would indicate that it's future. There's no indication that anything is retrospective.
And in fact, I've looked at the digital grant, Molly, myself, and I don't think it would be retrospective, but also, you know, these grants always come with some real red tape. So it's not going to apply. So say, for example, you wanted to rebrand your website, it's not going to apply for things like that. So you'd have to, yeah, I'm saying, you know, it needs to be something, or my advisor told me it needs to be something quite structural. You need to demonstrate why it's some sort of e-commerce or a restructure. So we're looking at the customer journey and directing clients to the right place when they reach our website. So we're going to see if we can fit into that. But, you know, it's not easy just to say, well, I want this help with digital and I want the 50% funding. So I'd be very surprised if it applies retrospectively.
Me too.
Yeah. You can wish though, right?
Well, you never know.
Here's hoping. Okay, so anything else at all? Any other questions?
Oh, there is one more.
Oh, go on, Phoebe.
How would you approach employees who refuse to participate in lateral flow testing?
I'll let you take this one, Phoebe.
Thank you. I think it depends on the reason. I think you'd have to take it on a case by case, to be honest. I think if their reason was because they were worried about it, then obviously you wouldn't want to just go straight into a disciplinary. But if they didn't really have any particular valid reason or concern, then I would just try to coax them around, to be honest, and potentially could consider a disciplinary if it did get really bad and it was somebody who didn't really have a clear reason, like I said. But if it's somebody that has, you know, kind of people that don't believe in COVID and things like that and quite fundamental beliefs about it, then I'd be very careful as to how you approach it, because we just don't really know how these things are going to be perceived. But I think I'd just take it on a case by case. I think the best thing to do is have a policy, though, to be honest, just to try and set out what your stance is and to give people more information on it, because the more information they've got, hopefully, the less likely they are to have concerns.
Yeah,
and
we haven't got a testing policy yet, have we? We've only got the vaccine one, but it is something that we I'm
sure we will. Just keep an eye
knock one up, I'm sure.
Yeah, quickly work one up. But yeah, just keep an eye on our mail shots that we send out, because as soon as we have something, we'll make sure that we send it out to everybody.
Now, what some employers are doing to try and get around this is incentivising. Have we talked about incentivising yet?
I briefly touched upon it, but not in any detail.
Yeah, so both with the vaccine and the lateral flow tests, because the tests have just become free in the last week or so for employers with less than 50 employees, a lot of employers are wanting to use them, but employees are concerned that if they then test positive and they don't have symptoms, they will have to be caught in the test and trace and will have to isolate, which is going to affect not only their work situation, but their wider family. So you can introduce incentives if you want to. Now, again, you've got to use those with care, because you might get caught with indirect discrimination. But the policy that we're going to be sending out for the vaccinations will give you an option to incentivize with a bonus payment for people that agree to have the vaccine. And I think the same sort of thing could apply to the testing. So, a gift voucher, or there's a number of suggestions in the policy. You don't have to do that, but if for you as an employer it's really important to get people to participate in it, then incentivizing it is more likely to hold up than disciplining someone if they don't, or making it mandatory.
Can I ask another quick question? Sorry, me again. Just on the lateral flow testing, we sent out some information to members today about obviously accessing those through the government website. If you haven't got a company registration number, you can't go any further on the website without ordering them. So if, for instance, you are a tenant of a pub, which is obviously a big percentage of our members, and they haven't actually registered a company, they won't be able to access that. Is there any other way of them accessing the tests, or they have to do it?
Not currently, no. Not the free ones that are supplied by the government. Obviously, if they want to buy them, they can buy them. There are places that sell them. Yeah. And if you do need anybody, we actually know a company that does sell them. So if you need their details, let us know.
Yeah, that'd be great. Just from a reference point of view for those who haven't got access to the free ones and want to use them, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we can. Jay, you'll be able to send details over, won't you? You've got
I think are they about £9 a test, or one of the
They're not cheap. Yeah.
So. But the government, all we know is what it says on the government site about what you need to establish whether you're eligible.
It's strange as well that it's only until the end of the month that you can register for them. You'd think they would leave it a lot more open than that, wouldn't you?
I think they're testing out, whether that's going to work, and whether that's going to, I think it is an experiment, and they started off with employers with more than 50 employees, and now they're bringing it down. And seeing what works. But we'll send you details of the bought ones.
Thanks.
So Phoebe, Ruth's got a question. Are you?
Yeah, I've just seen that. The answer to that is yes, they can.
What was the question?
It was, can they get SSP if they, sorry, I didn't phrase that very well. So if somebody in their household is waiting for a test result, can that person get SSP? And yes, they can. And I just checked that as well on the government website. So that is right.
So if that's all the questions and there's nothing else, we will bid you adieu. What I would say is that we do, for those of you who don't get our newsletters, we do quite frequent newsletters, and we've done a lot of blogs around everything Corona and COVID related. So if you go to the website, you'll find that we keep that quite up to date with sort of news of COVID. And if you did, our next sessions are going to be the 30th of March, 7th of April and 19th of April. You can find them on Eventbrite to book on. And finally, the final slide is, if you do need to contact us, this is how you can. Okay. So was there anything you would like to say, Jay?
No, I think we might add some more dates, because we wanted to keep these fairly small group sessions, but we're getting, lots of interest in them. So, and it's good for us as well, because it tests the advice we're giving. We're constantly being asked questions, which is challenging us and making sure that we're giving the best advice. So we'll probably add some more dates going forward. But keep in touch with us. Yeah, as Kat says, we're very busy. Writing blogs on everything related to the subject, so it's been quite stressful for lots of people, and I hope that we're helping in some way in alleviating that a bit. And Molly, especially for you, my team cannot wait for the 12th of April. We've got a table booked.
Yeah, but we've just got to decide who we don't want to come along, because I think there's 7 of us.
Yeah, no, you have to make sure somebody gets a bit sick that day.
Yeah, we're gonna have to ditch someone.
Yeah, no, we can't wait for and we have we have a brewery across the road, so we'll be going there to the beer garden.
Oh, that's great news. Yeah, no, we can't wait either. I've got about 4 different bookings all over the place. Not for the same day, I hasten to add, because I don't want to let any of my good pubs down. But yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, great to see everyone. If you've got any questions that we've not managed to answer, or you want to ask later on, then just drop us a line, and we'll put you in touch with the best person to answer that. And take care, and we'll see you at the next session if you want to join us again, although some of it will be duplicated content. And yeah, we'll see you hopefully